Welcome to the Recruiter Abroad podcast. My name's Dalton Doherty, and in this podcast series, I will be bringing you the stories behind expat recruiters who have emigrated around the world. So far in the series, we have discussed Gareth McGlynn's career as a professional footballer and what led him moving to Perth in Western Australia to become a recruiter, and then further on moving to New York and then back to Ireland to set up his own recruitment business. I've discussed Dara Everard's journey, which also took him to Perth and then back to Dublin, and how that accelerated his career. Last week, I spoke to Alex Zobelli, who is an Italian recruiter who moved first to London and then on to Tokyo. We've been getting great feedback on the podcast so far, and we appreciate every last one of you who have been reaching out to us on LinkedIn. Please, if you enjoy it, do send it to a friend and give it a little like and share on LinkedIn. And if you want to come on the podcast, or you know somebody who you think would be a great guest, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always keen to hear from you. This week, I'll be interviewing Rich Miles, an accountancy and finance recruiter from Birmingham who moved his 2 kids and wife to San Diego. Rich has over 20 years experience in recruitment, and we discuss the professional and personal risks he made to make that move happen, and ultimately how it changed his life for the better. Rich and his family are really living the Californian dream, and in the following interview, you will hear how he made it happen. I hope you enjoy. Richard Miles.
How are you doing, sir?
Welcome to the Recruiter Abroad podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Rich, I've given everybody a brief rundown on your background and your story to date. Can you bring us right back to what got you into recruitment in the year of 1997?
Oh, student debt, probably more than anything else. It was I was coming out of university, and I'll be honest, I'd really graduate fairs, graduate schemes, none of it really, and I didn't really know what I was going to do when I went into university. So coming out of university, I probably knew any less.
What did you study in uni?
Politics and international relations for my sins. You know what? I think it was one of those, and it's probably helped me out with this career in recruitment, is I was never really any good at black or white. Math, biology, anything that you just had to be right or wrong. Whereas you give me a grey area like politics, where you could argue your point and find a reason to justify your point, then that was me hands down. So that might have been what led me to ending up with a career like this, where you just have to talk for a living.
Yeah, well, storytelling is the key to all great recruiters, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is, you know, and liking the sound of your own voice never hurts either.
Who are you talking to? I've got a podcast. Yeah. So you graduate, you've loads of debt. You're in Birmingham, was that right?
Yeah, no, that was it. And one of my friends, his brother, who also lived in Birmingham, he was going out with a girl at the time, and now I forget what the company was. It's probably changed in a different incarnation nowadays, but it was one of the sort of the computer people type of businesses. I forget perhaps which one. And okay, she'd got into that having come out of university. And, you know, IT recruitment back then, I mean, maybe you still make a lot of money in it nowadays, but they were earning some ridiculous amounts of money. And, you know, the barriers to entry weren't there, having had a non-specialist degree. So, you know, went for a couple of interviews, got offered the one with Badenoch and Clark, and you know, sort of having graduated in June, I was starting with them in July of '97.
And that's the type of place where they punch you in the face on your first day. It's real old school UK recruitment back then, isn't that right?
Oh, I mean, we were basically got the job. It was all sort of the Birmingham office. There was only about 10 of us in the Birmingham office at the time, but you were sent down to London straight away for a week sort of induction, so to speak. And you were literally locked in a room, sort of 9 to 5 every single day, just being beaten over the head. How do you sell a pen? This is what you do. This is what you don't do. Yeah. So
how do you sell a pen?
I still probably couldn't tell you nowadays. So everyone will quote you that line from Wolf of Wall Street, but I can't see you, so I can't take your pen away from you for you to ask for it back, really.
So it's 1997. I barely remember it, and I'm 35. A lot of our listeners will be in their early 20s, thinking of moving abroad. What was it like working in recruitment then? What type of tools were you using? And walk us through that.
Well, I mean, for starters, we didn't. I think toward the end, we might have had external email, or there was one system in the whole office that had an external email facility. Everything else was just internal email. So you could email the guys in the London office or the guys in the Milton Keynes office, but as in broadcasting to the outer world, I think we had one system that basically did it. All of the CVs were manually typed up by one administrator that we had. You had to file all of your own mail shots. Advertising copy had to be written on a Monday in time for it to go in the local paper on a Wednesday. And I suppose the biggest thing was with the restrictions on email, you had to fax all the CVs that you sent, had to go via the external fax machine.
Well, what's a fax machine? I'm only joking.
Yeah. But do you know what the scary thing is? What we used to do as well, I mean, there was a business which, again, maybe some people will or won't know. It's changed its sort of face and name over the years, but we used to sort of go head to head quite a lot with the old Harrison Willis Group, which sort of subsequently became TMP. And they were one of our biggest competitors in the interim market back then in Birmingham. And what we used to do, we knew their fax number because we'd had guys that had basically come over from them to work for us. So when a job came in and we knew that the company had probably given it to them as well, we would start faxing blank pieces of paper to their fax machine because it blocked it, so that they then had to wait for those to come through before they could send any out.
Precious. So you're in that. So you're in BNC. You're doing finance, temp finance, was it?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And you kind of did your basic apprenticeship there, and then you moved on. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that was it. I mean, and I think, look, I'll put my hand up to this as well. I think at the time, it was, again, recruitment was in its relative infancy to a certain extent, and certainly maybe in the provinces, as people would call it, like Birmingham. And you start to earn some quite good money, and I was just out of university. I was a bit cocky, and I probably thought I was better than I was at the time. I think I had my geographical remit was I had 3 letters. I had R, S, and T, and any company that started with any of those letters, I got. Now, in Birmingham, I was quite lucky because we had 7 Trent, so they sort of fell under my thing. So I was doing quite well for myself, but like a lot of, I suppose, young guys, I got a bit carried away with it, got a bit too mouthy. And my female boss at the time and I clashed a bit too many times. And of course, you think you're invincible.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, until you get called into a meeting one day and you've seen it a million times yourself and you said, did somebody just put my bags outside that main door?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm not going to be going back in there this afternoon. So, it was all done very amicably at the time. And I suppose, like a lot of these things, as you go through the career, did that teach me a good life lesson to not be as cocky as I should be? It probably did. And then, I was fortunate at the time to get a call from the guys at ABPM, who were a sort of leading regional practice at the time. Got on very well with Reg, the owner, and it was on to the second chapter.
And what the second chapter was 14 years, is that right?
No, well, I had the time at ABPM, which was after Badenoch and Clark. Okay. And so I was with those guys about 18 months or so. And then it was as was at the time, Select Finance Group, which became SF Group. Yeah. That was when I joined them in January of 2002.
And how did that turn into 14 years? How do you keep yourself going every day doing this job and dealing with the highs and lows? Did it get easier? Like, what was the journey there like?
Oh, I mean, I think, and the one thing I'll always say about this, and in a way, when I left, I was very, very sorry to leave that because, again, it's very cliched, but within that, it was a real us against the world. It was a business that hadn't been very long in its own sort of lifespan, and it was exciting, it was new, and it was all sort of us against the big bad world of your Michael Pages and everybody else. And we were taking them on. We were the young pretenders, and we had a very entrepreneurial owner at the time. And yeah, and going, it was very exciting. It was very challenging because every win you got was great. And then you go through that and it gets more exciting. And then, of course, the one thing that everybody forgets that you're allowed to have in recruitment, of course, is the personal life, because, you know, most of the time you don't have time for a personal life except for after work drinks on a Friday. But you know, the wife came along, and then it was in sort of 2007 that we had our first daughter. And that's, of course, when, well, my wife gave up work, our first daughter came along, and then the wheels came off the track in 2008, and we were like, salary down, one more mouth to feed, and recruitment only going in one direction. So that was, you know, there was no time to be sort of throwing everything in the air then and sort of taking a chance elsewhere. But
how did you hold on to your job?
Well, I mean, I suppose I was relatively fortunate in a way, because I was probably the second or third longest serving within the business at the time. And we'd got quite a good, we basically just brought it all back into the core. And unfortunately, some people, newer consultants, recruits, did lose their jobs. But having been one of the longest tenures, and unfortunately coming off the back of one of my best ever years in recruitment, which never hurts, it bought me a bit of time. But the big thing with our business, again, I suppose, we were owned by one guy, so there weren't any shareholders calling the shots. He wasn't gaining that business. That was more like a lifestyle business for him, because he had other sources of income. So to a certain degree, whilst it was, you don't want the business to fall apart, there perhaps weren't the pressures to continually make profit that there might have been in other circumstances and other organisations.
And throughout your career there, did you actively pursue the principal consultant route as opposed to trying to manage lots of people?
I mean, and I suppose that was another interesting thing with that business. I mean, for a time, I did become a manager within the sort of the organisation, with the sort of the regional teams that we had there. But, you know, it was, the circumstances behind that were more sort of out of a reaction to, unfortunately, somebody moving on from the organisation. And it was kind of, well, would you like to do this? I mean, management, it's one of those things that I wouldn't shy away from it, but did I actively seek it out like some people do? You know, that the whole, as you see all these job titles nowadays, it's consultant, then it's senior consultant, or it's principal. You know, I think it was more for me, and maybe this was born out of having gone through something like 2008, 2009. I never wanted to be in a position where I wasn't needed. I couldn't point to my billings. I couldn't point to my fee generation. And going too far down that management route, it is just always something I'd shirked away from, because, you know, having had that experience of having the relative rug pulled out from under you, I always wanted to be in control of my own destiny. And I saw continually billing as a way to do that.
And did the way you managed your day throughout the years, did that change, or are you fairly consistent? Are you a very regimented type person, or?
I become more lazy, I suppose, is the
yeah.
And I think,
because most people do, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, how is it difficult to not become, because you build up, you start from a relative nothing. Maybe you're lucky, maybe you inherit a good desk, maybe you inherit a good geographical region, but by default, the better, I suppose, you become via experience, the easier things come to you. So there isn't that necessity to meticulously plan the day. Now, the one thing, again, I will say that was, you know, beyond compare really with SF Group, were the internal systems we had, where we had something that was effectively called the working day. And this thing, which sat on your desktop, basically mapped out candidates, clients, how you go about your marketing. So the internal system was there that you could utilize it as much as you wanted as a new consultant, or as a more seasoned consultant. You could take the bits that you wanted, but you were continually reminded of what you needed to do.
Yeah. That's the biggest piece I would struggle with in recruitment is keeping it consistent every week, you know, and that's why I almost have to develop the system where I'm recording a podcast one day or doing it another day. I'm trying to just put as many different type things into my week to keep my creative juices flowing. It's maybe that's a fault compared to like top recruiters like your boss.
Well, I think that the thing is, you're two types of people, and again, I suppose it's almost coming back to the personal circumstance that you had, and I was talking to Carl, one of the directors here, about it the other day, because he's just about to have his second daughter come along, or son, and we were just very much we were talking about it, and I said, well, the thing is, things will come along in your life that will mean you will be wholeheartedly committed, for 6 months at your job, but then all of a sudden you're moving house, or you have another child that comes along, or, maybe you're unfortunate and there's a death, whatever it might be, there's always something that's going to influence and drive you and give that focus or retain that focus or take that focus away from you. So if you can just keep a core line of what you need to do, then, I suppose it's the typical recruitment consultant thing, and it's a real fault of a perm biller, I think, as well, because you get your fees in, your pipeline looks very good, you take your foot off the gas because you think, oh, I'm all right, I can see my billings for the future. What happens? 3 months after that, you've got nothing in your pipeline because you stop working. So I think, that, if nothing else, that's what always drives me, I suppose, as well, because I've seen it, and I've been guilty of it so many times, of not trying to keep a focus there.
Yeah, I wake up with fear every day. And that fear is only getting worse and worse.
But, I always said to myself that I would not be doing this job when I was 40, because you think, I'll have found a proper job by this point. Surely I will have done. And then all of a sudden, I'm sort of now 43, and you think, God, when am I going to get a proper job? Yeah. But, then people say, oh, email comes along. That's going to take away everything. Now, Indeed's there. That's going to take everything away. LinkedIn's going to take everything. I hear all these advertisements about what is it that we have here, Zip Recruiter, and how that's got some sort of AI built into it.
And that's a lot of shite.
Yeah. There are always things that you could worry about, but the one thing that will never go away is having a direct relationship and just being able to relate to people. You can't replicate that.
And tell me, what do you think like the qualities are of really top performers that you've worked with?
I mean, I think one of the key things is it's just having that ability to, and that desire to want to bill. And that I think is one of the strongest things. And, and I think in some ways as well, it's that needing the money. I've seen some really good people come along, but when they get there, can they survive on their base salary? They probably can. Yeah. And, maybe they're in a fortunate situation. Their spouse has got a good job, whatever it may be. But I think if you take away that if I don't get that fee over the line, or I don't do everything I can to get that fee over the line, that's going to directly impact me and my family, or my situation, or whether you want that deposit on a car, or, you don't have to have a family. But if you need to have that drive, whether you want to be the top biller in the office because it's a pride thing and you're just that competitive, or you want the money because you really want the money, whatever it is, you have to have something that drives you in doing this job. There are a lot less stressful jobs where you could earn the equivalent base salary without all the heartache and pain that goes with it.
So needy and greedy.
Oh, there you go. That's a catchphrase you could use.
Yeah. I'm stealing that from a friend of mine, to be honest. I can't quote him though. He's too worried about his personal image. So you're obviously good at this, right? You've done 14 years in this company. It's worked out. You've survived some of the tough times of the recession. You've built your desk back up. You've had a kid. Did you have a second kid?
Yeah. So we had a second in 2009.
2009. Okay, so you're getting your life back. Things are good. What makes you raise your hand and say, maybe I'll try America now?
Do you know what? It's one of those things, and I mean, as well as I do, the whole Australia thing, which was huge when there was a mass migration, it seemed like, and I've got good friends that that went over to Australia in and out of recruitment. And I had the opportunity to have a couple of interviews for that and to make that move. And for me personally, it just never appealed as much to go to Oz. I mean, I visited it. I love the country. I love the people there. But it always just seemed too far for me. And I think with my wife as well, I mean, she's very family orientated. But we'd always both said, I mean, I'd lived in America, funnily enough, actually lived in San Diego prior to going to university. My wife had lived in America. She lived in Virginia for a period of time as well. And when her old job, she used to be cabin crew for Virgin. So she was back and forth from America a lot. As a result, we holidayed there a lot. And I think when you and I very first spoke, and I almost said to you, look, I'd be interested, but it would only be America. And in the back of my mind, did I say that thinking that I didn't think it was possible? Because I'd always thought one thing America's got enough of is salespeople. They don't need any more recruitment consultants. Why on earth would you need a recruitment consultant out there? So because I thought it was impossible, I never actually properly pursued it. And maybe I threw it out there as something of, well, yeah, that'd be great. Of course I'd move. But I think fundamentally, as you quite rightly say, for the rights or wrongs of it, everything was sorted. I was in a good place with the business. We just had our loft converted at our house. We just remortgaged. Everything was settled. And I think it's like everything in life, really. If something appears when you're not expecting it to appear, and then you're not running away from anything because things were probably as good as they were going to get or had been for a while at home. My wife's job was sorted. She'd gone back to the university. She'd qualified. She got into teaching. She was getting promotions at work. The kids were settled. We lived in a good geographical striking distance for a good secondary school for them. There was no reason to come here, but that was probably the best reason to come here.
And it's interesting you say that about Australia. You would probably have more options in Australia than America. There's more boutiques that would hire. There's not too many employers that would hire somebody with as much experience as you in America at this moment. So I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? How recruitment companies, they tend to focus heavily on people with less than 5 years experience.
And they do. And I think, I think you and I were sort of going back a bit and forth on it on LinkedIn the other day when I saw a thread on there about it. And you always have to be quite careful when you throw something out there on LinkedIn. You're never sure who you're going to insult or who's going to take it the wrong way. But I think, yeah. But I think, there is, but why? And I'm the oldest guy in our office here by quite some way. I'm older than the guys that own the business. I'm older than the directors. And there is that kind of conception that it's a young person's game. And I suppose it almost goes back to what I said earlier. In many ways, unless you're really going to go and own your own recruitment business to a certain extent, or you're going down the management or the director route and you're almost becoming into that business development role, people generally don't continue to run desks. As if you can speak to having had 20 years within a profession to a certain extent, it just doesn't happen. And I think I sit there and I think, well, look, I don't want to be one of the directors at the moment. I don't want to run the office. What I want to do is I still want to bill because I see that as my greatest potential to earn money. And it's what got me to the table in the first place. It's why you're interested in me. So why wouldn't you want somebody with that amount of experience come in and billing? It doesn't mean I'm any less hungry. And in a way, am I going to be more committed than somebody that is like in their mid-20s that's maybe had a couple of years really good success? That isn't to say that they're not as motivated as me, but I'm probably even more motivated than them because I've got all of these commitments that I have to honour and I've got to live up to. But I get that a lot of people will see it, and there's an aversion to it because they don't get that motivation sometimes.
So, Rich, you're thinking of moving to America. What are all the things that you're taking into consideration?
Oh, how am I going to tell my mum was probably the biggest one. I'm gonna steal her grandkids away from her, but fortunately, my brother helped me out there because he had a little boy of his own, so that I knew that would soften the blow a bit. But I think I just and I've said this to quite a few people when I was looking at it, and we went back and forth, and we're not going to go literally for about, because I was talking on and off to John and Carl here and well as I think I started talking in like the March, and then we finally, and it took a long time to go. And I think we just, every day I'd wake up and say, shall we, shan't we, shall we, shan't we? And, and I just got to the point where I thought, if I sit there in my 60s and you didn't do it, then you'd always regret it. And for the rights or wrongs of it, I've always been one of these people that jump first and then look for a soft place to land on the way down. Now, I think when you've got kids and a wife, it's not just my life that we're playing with. And I think Kate and I had said before, my wife, that if it was just the two of us, I wouldn't have needed a second thought. We'd have just done it. But when you're looking at the kids and you're looking at everything else that's involved, and the parents, grandparents are all getting old, you can't just make a selfish decision. But then I think the real clinch point was, I sat down with my dad and I told him before I told my mum, and she does know this now retrospectively, but I just kind of, I said to him, what should I do? And he said, well, look, our job is to bring you up for you to be able to make the best decisions and for us to wish you all the very best. If you decide you do this, we'll back you. If you don't want to go, we'll be, just as happy that you're staying, but you've got to do what you want to do.
What a real selfless man, hey?
Well, he is, except when it comes to giving his son's pocket money back in the day, but that's another point. But I think, we'd always regretted it. And then, again, it's a bit naff and it's a bit cliched, but we were watching a movie the other night, Kate and I, and it was based in Hollywood. And you're kind of seeing like the Hollywood Hills and everything else like that. And said, if we were watching this movie back in England now, thinking that could have been us going up there this weekend, you'd be. And what's the worst that can happen? You come, you have a great time, you go back home again if it doesn't work. But I think the thing that I suppose, aside from that, we did know that bringing the girls here, you kind of, again, it makes you make it work. Because they were getting to that point where they were about a year away from going up to secondary school. So they were still young enough to see it as a big adventure and be excited about it. But if we left it, and we said this, if this had only come along another year, 2 years down the line, we probably wouldn't have done it, because obviously they then start, the whole education piece becomes a bit more serious.
Yeah, like my wife's pregnant and she's due in July. We have a 14-month-old boy. We're in the process of moving into a house we just bought, and it's 3 minutes down the road. And you don't own a lot of stuff, but it's been a nightmare. What was the process like moving your entire family to San Diego from Birmingham? And like, how did you go about that? What did you have to consider? How did you find out that information?
Oh, now that was one of the course. You say yes, and in your head you think, right, okay, now we've actually got to sort things out. And I've still got one of my moleskin notebooks that I had, and it's got everything from, the shipping companies, the schools, car loans, banks. It's all the little things that I think you forget about, and that was one of the biggest challenges. Now, again, I think, a couple of the guys in our office have done it. And, one of the guys here, he literally turned up and he had a suitcase and a backpack. And I'm sort of like just staring there in wonderment, thinking, how can you do that? But then I suppose, I had, X amount of years of stuff and sofas and, beds. And I've got all this stuff. So because we thought if we were going to commit, we wanted to commit wholehearted, we had to go all in. So we took the decision to sell the house at home. Again, wow. At the time, it was quite heartbreaking to a certain extent, because we'd just been living in it, and we'd got the loft done. It was looking beautiful and we were enjoying it. And then it was right, we've got to take everything out. But we didn't want to just stick it on a sort of a rental, and then have everybody have our own stuff and everything. So, then you start to look at shipping containers and costs, and then you're like, how much? But then I was like, right, but if we sold it here, we're not going to get what we want. Then we've got to rebuy it over there, and there'd be so much. So it's like, right, let's just get one of those big containers that you always see sitting on the other side. And you think, I wonder what's in those. And just get it done. But I think the whole process, and that's why we actually, from start to finish, it took a while for us to actually physically be here. And again, I ended up coming for 2 months prior to my wife and girls coming out, because that gave me the opportunity to get here and everything else. But
have a few beers and enjoy yourself.
Do you know what? And it's a bit like everything. It can be as complicated or as easy as you make it. Was it easy? No. Did we have to look into a lot of things? Yes. Have I now been able to then make it easier for a lot of these other guys to come over and do it? I mean, like, for example, I passed my US driving license before John did, the owner. Now, John's been here for like 16, 17 months, but it took me coming here. And I suppose just because I am that way, it's like, what do you do, Rich? What do you do? I was like, right, John, you go here, you do this, you do this, and you do that. Oh, okay, right, I'll do that now.
You sound like his mum.
Yeah, but it is a bit like that. And he's like, how'd you do that? Where'd you get that from? So, and the one thing I will say, and I was always a bit, you can go onto these forums and you can go onto I actually didn't find many of those very useful. I think you almost just have to do it yourself, and, and you get, I don't want to phone anybody in America because it's going to cost me and everything. I just got on and I did that. And I think if and then I also found this great company who were able to facilitate me getting credit here in the UK, because I did it whilst I was in the US, rather, because I did it while I was in the UK. So they take my credit rating from the UK. It cost, I think, about £200 or something, but then it meant that all of that was taken care of. So, I mean, a bit of, again, preparation is key. And in this case, and probably having a wife kicking your backside every 5 minutes saying, have you done this? Have you done that? Then that certainly helps as well.
Wow. That's a lot of information packed into that. And just jumping a wee bit more into it, is it private school for the girls, or did you find a good public school, or how has that gone?
Yeah, I mean, and again, you see, when we were looking online at these things, there are a lot of these international schools, but touch wood, if this is something for the long term for us, which, at the moment we very much believe it is, and we were going to live in a community, I wanted my girls to go to that school. I mean, I had one of my best friends, he actually lived over in Switzerland for a while, and they went to an international school. I mean, he kind of knew
language stuff there involved.
Exactly. But I think here, I really wanted, and part of this whole move was for the kids as much as anything else. I knew that if I was sitting down with them at the age when they're in their 18, and they were like, "You mean we could have gone and lived in San Diego, but you kept us in Birmingham?" So that wasn't a conversation I ever wanted to have.
Shout out to Birmingham.
Yeah. But I think, I owed it to them, but then I also owed it to them to be able to give them the best opportunity to make friends. Now, I mean, we virtually have somebody from their school knocking on our door every evening for them to go out and play. And if I was driving them down to a school downtown, to an international school where they were getting to know other British kids or anything like that, would they have that?
No.
Probably not, and it's all, I suppose, comes down to that immersing yourself in the environment and actually going wholeheartedly into it. So I've met, apart from the guys that work here, I only really know one other British guy, and I met him by mistake almost, because he was at a sort of a house party in the local neighborhood, and he was a friend of a friend. All the other friends that we've made are American. All of the girls' friends, they're all local, and I think, and that's really helped our integration into the community here, and the school was a real linchpin of that.
Yeah, and so it really does sound like the Californian dream. Are you neighbours' gardens having barbecues and doing that at the weekend and all of that as well? It was it just obviously been Memorial Day weekend, and we had Carl, one of the directors here, he's just moved into our neighbourhood actually, so he came over with his wife and their little girl. We had
our neighbours came round. We started barbecuing at theirs, and then we migrated round to ours because I had more beers in my fridge. So we just all kind of upped and moved round to ours. Their dog came over. Some other random dog came over, and then the owner of that dog came round and he had a drink with us as well. So it is all, again, very cliched, but genuinely, the people here can't do enough for you. And I think a lot of that is San Diego and California are quite unique to a certain extent, because I think a lot of people are transplants here themselves. Yeah. It's very rare that you meet a native San Diegan. I mean, we've actually got one, Jessica, in our office. She sort of grew up here. But that aside, and certainly the parents at the school who we've met, they either came from Colorado or they've come from the East Coast. And so everybody's used to being that new person. And because they're used to being that new person, they reach out to you so much more, and you get invited to so much more. And you do genuinely find that people are very open. And of course, one of the great things is the weather. You can always be outside, so people aren't running out of your front door into the car, drive to work, running into work, and vice versa on the way back home. Because you are generally outside a lot of the time, it's difficult to not bump into people. And because the sun's shining the majority of the time, people are generally a lot happier as well. So they're more cordial when you actually have a conversation with them.
I'm going to have this podcast on loop for Charlotte when I get back now. San Diego, can we move? Oh. Let me bring you back to the business stuff. I heard a rumor it's worked out for you.
So far, so good. This, and I said, one of the things I said to John, and it rang really true, is that I would have been interested in this business even if they were in England. Now, the fact that this business is in California and the fact that it's in San Diego is like the icing on the cherry on the icing, however you'd want to pay. I've always enjoyed, and it goes back to the business I spent 14 years with. I like being in the little guy environment where you're up against somebody. You're not a Robert Half, you're not a Robert Walters, you're not a Michael Page. You're always going up against these guys and you're trying to take a piece of their pie. So you're always pushing to get something more. And what Ed over in Australia and what John subsequently has been able to build here in support of like Carl and the rest of the team here is that real, you care about what the other people do, and something I've had to learn here, because I've never had this before, is this whole split thing where you generate a job, you have 25% of this or you have 50% of this candidate. And that was always a bit alien to me. And I worried about it a bit, because I thought, well, does that mean people are trying to like keep candidates, or nobody's trying to share any information with you? But I mean, nothing could be further from the truth with these guys. And, it's all collaborative, because we're all here for a reason. And everybody has got each other's backs, and that's genuinely, you do feel like if you were out the office, somebody wouldn't not put your candidate forward if they were the best candidate for the role. And that is, as we all know, in recruitment, can be quite a unique thing.
And did you have to change anything about your style of recruitment, or was it just exact same?
And that's one of the things that I've worried about a lot. You go from 20 years that you built a market and you know everything and everyone, and you can cite this example or you could cite this person, to knowing nothing and nobody. But that was part of the challenge. And then you look at it and said, am I going to have to do things differently? Are people going to literally roll out the red carpet because you've got a British accent and they think you're landed gentry? Or are they just going to think you're obnoxious and they don't want anything to do with you? And it's probably somewhere in the middle. People are interested to talk to you because they're interested about why you did this, and then they're interested in your business because your business is quite new and all they perhaps know is Robert Half or something. But I haven't fundamentally had to change what I do, because people are people, and you adapt to certain people, and you can always find a common ground to have a conversation with somebody about. And again, I think a big part of that is maybe being a bit older, which comes back to that whole idea of why would you not hire a more seasoned consultant? Because they've got more life scars. They've got kids, or they've got mortgages, or they've got all these other things that are so commonplace with so many of the clients that you're dealing with, and people buy people. So if you can get people to like you and you can find that common ground, then why can't you then have a meaningful conversation with you? And are they going to put their trust in somebody that's had 6 weeks recruitment experience, who's inherited a desk, or are they going to trust somebody that's been doing it 15, 20 years who maybe knows what they're talking about? So I didn't really have to alter too much. I had to get used to the dress code because, you know, having been, even though we were quite casual where I was previously, it's very casual in California, you know, and especially so on a Friday. And there is, and people have told me, the clients who I've met who've come over from the East Coast, from Boston, they've just said how laid back the Californian and particularly the Southern Californian markets are in comparison. The one thing that is and has been a bit of an eye-opener here is that people perhaps aren't as always open to having a meeting when it's a meeting for a meeting's sake, as in, let's just have a catch-up for a coffee. They're interested initially because you've got something a bit different to say, but maybe that's just more indicative of the market in general at the moment, because it's job rich and candidate poor. People don't feel they need to be meeting you as much at the moment.
That's an interesting one. I think America, and I know that it isn't the way that your business works as such, but a lot of American clients that I deal with are more product driven. So it's more about getting that resume, maybe rather than getting to know the recruiter itself. So whereas in Australia, especially where the boys would have formed, it's coffees all the time. You know, it's the biggest difference is just the speed of the two markets, and the UK might be somewhere in between.
I think you're right, and Callum, the other guy who works here, who came over, I mean, he's a British guy initially, but he came over from Australia, and he said that was one of the marked differences. You know, he was doing a sort of business development role out there. He said, I could fill up my entire week with coffees and catch-ups, and, you know, you'd almost be turning meetings down. Whereas he's come here, and as you said, it's very well, if you've got something to talk to me about, I'd love to sit down and talk to me, or show me what you've got, so to speak, especially in the unique market space that they're offering in that IT market. That, you know, and again, you know, if I've got a candidate that's got that specific experience, you've got to pick up the phone and you've got to share that. And that's why the market is at the moment. It's about taking something meaningful to market and then having the ability to tell the story behind it, because you're only as good as your product. And if you haven't got the product they're looking for, then they're going to go looking for it elsewhere.
Final question, Rich. What advice would you give anybody who's thinking of making the move to the US?
There is no reason on this planet to not do it at the moment. I mean, I think everybody, if you, took a general cross-section of society of the UK recruiters and you said, which two markets would you like to go and work in? You could choose Southern California, you can have New York, or you can have Australia, just because of that whole idyllic image of Southern California. I would bet you would probably get a larger percentage saying Southern California. Now, and as a younger recruiter, shall we say, now is the time to do it, because you can come here, you can rent somewhere. The rents are comparable from what the guys here have told me, of somewhere like in the south or in London. So there has never been a better opportunity to be able to get yourself here and make a mark and then build a life here. The only bit of advice I would ever give anybody who's potentially looking at coming here with a family is just make sure that you do your sums, because, you know, it would be amiss of me to say anything different, but, you know, the housing market here is crazy at the moment. And, you know, it's one of the things that perhaps we underestimated a bit. But would I change anything that we would have done? Not in a heartbeat, because my girls and subsequently my wife, and therefore if they're happy, I'm happy. You know, the lifestyle and the opportunities that they have here are limitless, beyond anything that they would have in the UK. And, you know, to that end alone, how could I ever deny them that opportunity? So if you are in any doubt about, at the very least, exploring it, I would say explore it. And if you have that opportunity, what's the worst that could happen? Doesn't work out, you go home. But I would like to sort of suggest that it would work out.
Richard Miles, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Take care. Talk soon.
All the best. Bye.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. Rich Miles, what a gentleman and a great guest. I found on a personal level, his story was really inspiring. We're in the process of having our second child at the moment and buying a house and doing all that type of stuff. And lots of people say, that's you're settled down now, you can't move. I think Rich's story really proves that you can move and you can make these things happen. You just have to take a bit of a gamble and back yourself. And San Diego sounds like the place to do it. It's family orientated, the sun shines, the market's great, and it's really worked out for Rich and his family. So I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and till next week, we will be back on with another great guest, and I think we'll be speaking about America again.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.